All right, Mr. Austin here, Algebra 2, back with lesson 3.6. We're now going to talk about multiplying matrices. I might remind you that multiplying matrices is a lot different than adding and subtracting. And I think as we go through some of these, you will see why. All right, let's take a look. Okay, example number 1. Example number 1 says to state whether the product of matrix A times matrix B is defined. Meaning that in some cases you are not able to multiply two matrices together. Let me show you an example. We're looking at this first example, which is a 2 by 3. So let me just draw that up here and show you what that's going to look like. And again, I'm just going to make up some numbers. There's our first example of a 2 by 3. This has 2 rows by 3 columns. Our second example, wow, this is a big one. This one's a 4 by 3. 4 rows by 3 columns. Let me just throw in some numbers. It's not important what these are. All right, so we've got a 4 rows by 3 columns and a 2 rows by 3 columns. We're wanting to multiply those two together. Well, first of all, here's what you need to know. In order to be able to multiply these two together, the number of columns in the first matrix has to match the number of rows in the second matrix. Now, in this case, you'll notice it's a 2 by 3 and a 4 by 3, meaning the number of columns in the first matrix does not match the number of rows in the second matrix. If that's the case, these two cannot be multiplied together. So let's take a look at our first example up here. Our first example up here says, part A, because the number of, and we're going to fill in columns in A, which are 3, do not match the number of, what do we say, rows in B, which is 4, the product AB is not defined. So you're not able to multiply, again, if the number of columns in your first matrix doesn't match the number of rows in your second matrix. That's our first example, example A. All right, let's erase that. And let's take a look at example B. Example B. This time it says we're going to multiply a 3 by 3 and a 3 by 2. So this time let's just do this. Let's say we're going to do a 3 by 3. And we're going to multiply that by a 3 by 2. Let's color code this. First thing we want to notice. We notice that our columns in the first one match up with our rows in the second one. If that takes place, we know that we can multiply these two together. And here's the easy way to figure it out. When we do multiply these things together, these two numbers on the outside will become the size of the matrix we get when we do multiply those two together. So what we'll have is a 3 by 2. So let's take a look at part B. Because A is a 3 by 3 matrix and B is a 3 by 2 matrix, the product AB is defined and is a 3 by 2 matrix. Looking up at our example, you can see how that happens. Okay, let's take a look at our next example. First of all, multiplying matrices. And again, I told you multiplying matrices is a little bit different than adding them. When we were adding and subtracting them, we simply just added their corresponding parts. Well, multiplication does not work that way. It says here, to find the element in the ith row, which could be any row we want, And the jth column, again, could be any column we want, of the product matrix A times B, you're going to multiply each element in the row by the corresponding element in the column. So here's the big difference when we're multiplying. And then we add those two products together. Let's do some color coding, see if we can follow what we got below. First part. Okay, so basically we're looking at this first row, which I'll circle here so you can see it, and I'm definitely going to use colors. That way it'll make it easier for you to follow. So in the very first matrix, the row, and in the very first or second matrix, the column. This is where we get this here. A times E, which is the first A times E, plus B times G. And that's what gives us our answer that goes in this first entry. All right? Okay, let's look at the next one. And again, I'm going to erase so you can see. We're going to keep the first row, and now we're going to move to the second column. So now we've got row 1 times column 2. That's where we get this answer. A times F and B times H. And when we add that together, we'll get an answer. So basically we took, and if we look at it again, we took and multiplied row 1 in the first matrix times column 1 in the second matrix and got our first entry. And then we came back and multiplied row 1 in the first matrix times column 2 in the second matrix. And that's how we get our second answer. All right, you'll notice that that is the first row, and we're done. We've multiplied the first row times both columns. So we're going to jump down and take a look at what we do with the second row. All right, row 2, here it is. Row 2, we're going to multiply times column 1 in the second matrix. And that's where we'll get this. C times E plus D times G. And that's where we get this entry. And then you've probably already guessed it. We're going to go ahead and multiply column 1 again times, or row 1 again, I'm sorry, times column 2 in the second matrix. And that's where we get this. C times F plus D times H. And that's where we get our entry here. So if we go back and look what we just did there, we'll do it by color coding again so you can see it. We took row 2 this time times column 1, and we got this entry. And then we took row 2 times column 2, and we got our last entry. And again, that's how you get your 4 answers. Notice we multiplied a 2 by 2 and a 2 by 2, and we ended up with a 2 by 2. Okay, let's move on to example number 2. In example number 2, we're going to find the product of two matrices. And basically what I'd like to do here in example number 2 is I'm going to show you how to multiply these two matrices using the example that we looked at previous. And we're going to do this by hand. And I'm going to walk you through the steps so you can see this happen. This is going to be part 1 of lesson 3.6. In part 2, I'm going to show you how to do this on a calculator. All right, so here we go. Part 1. It says, find AB if A is a 2 by 2 and B is also a 2 by 2. So we're multiplying a 2 by 2 times a 2 by 2. The product of AB is defined because, again, let me remind you, we've got a 2 by 2 times a 2 by 2, meaning that the column in the first matrix matches the row in the second matrix, and therefore when that happens, we said that you simply can take these two numbers that'll give you your result, which is going to be the result of a 2 by 2 matrix. All right, so we can see the matrix here. Let's start by multiplying these things out by hand. I'm going to try to show you as many steps as I can. I'm going to color code it. I'm going to draw it up here for you so you can see how it's going to work. And we're going to make this matrix really, really big because we're going to write out every step as much as we can. All right. In our first step, we're going to multiply row 1 times column 1. And we're going to show you what that's going to look like. So inside here, row 1 times column 1, that's going to give us 1 times 3 plus, and now we're going to do negative 2 times 7. And you can see that in the two circles that I have. I've got 1 times 3 plus negative 2 times 7. And that's going to give us our first entry. All right? So again, so that we don't have too much on the screen here, I'm going to erase for this next one. We're going back to, again, row 1, but this time times column 2. And that's going to give us our second entry. And that's going to be 1 times negative 6 plus negative 2 times negative 1. And again, let me show you where those came from. We've got 1 times negative 6 plus negative 2 times negative 1. And that's going to give you your second entry. Okay? Let me erase that again so we can jump down and try the next one. All right, in the next one, just using a slightly different color just to show you that we're in a different row now. We're now going to do row 2 times column 1. And that's going to give us 5 times 3 plus negative 4 times 7. Just to show you where that comes from, we got 5 times 3 plus negative 4 times 7. And that's going to give us our third entry. Okay, let me erase this and give you our fourth one. We're going to do, again, row 2 in the first matrix times column 2 in the second matrix. And that one's going to give us 5 times negative 6 plus negative 4 times negative 1. And lastly, let's show you where those come from. That's 5 times negative 6 plus negative 4 times negative 1. And that gives us our fourth entry. Okay, so let's erase that off so we can see the matrix again. And now what we're going to do here is we're simply going to give you what those answers are going to look like for our final answer. So when we write our final answer, which we already know our final answer is going to be a 2 by 2 matrix, all we have to do is the math involved up here. So starting in the top left-hand corner, right here, we're going to do 1 times 3 is 3, plus negative 2 times 7, which is negative 14. 3 plus negative 14 is negative 11 for our first entry. Okay, let's go to our second entry, which is right here. We've got 1 times negative 6, which is negative 6, plus negative 2 times negative 1, which is positive 2. And negative 6 minus 2 is going to, or plus 2 is going to give us a negative 4. All right, let's come down here to our third entry. We're going to have 15 plus negative 28, which is going to give us negative 13. And the last one down here in the bottom left, we are going to have a negative 30 plus 4, and that gives us negative 26. And that is the 2 by 2 matrix that you will get when you multiply a 2 by 2 with a 2 by 2. Remember, this is part 1 for 3.6, and in part 1 I told you I'd be showing you how to do this by pencil paper. So be sure to, once you finish this video, go ahead and click on part 2 where I'm going to show you how to do this using your calculator.